He thought he was about to expose Keanu Reeves as a fraud on live TV. What happened next left millions speechless. As the cameras rolled and the accusations flew, Keanu said just one name, and everything changed. Who was the little girl he spoke of? And what secret did the anchor never see coming? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. Ryan Maxwell stared at his reflection in the brightly lit dressing room mirror, adjusting his tie for the 10th time. The Channel 9 logo hovered behind him on a digital screen, softly pulsing in crimson red. This was it. Prime time. A live interview with Keanu Reeves, the kind of exposure most journalists could only dream of. But tonight wasn't meant to be polite conversation. It wasn't a tribute piece. It wasn't even meant to be balanced. Ryan had been told that this was his moment, the night that would put him on the map. His producer, Dana Kellner, had called it the turning point. She'd slipped him a sealed folder just 20 minutes earlier, a thick bundle of documents she claimed had come from a whistleblower inside Keanu Reeves's charitable organization, the Reeves Foundation. As Ryan flipped through the papers now, his fingers trembled slightly. They outlined suspicious transactions, unexplained wire transfers, missing tax filings, and expense reports with red flags all over them. At least, that's what the summary page said. Ryan hadn't had time to verify the details. There was no time for deep digging. Dana had made it clear. Keanu's team had agreed to the interview under the assumption it would be a standard sit-down. They didn't know the tone would turn. "This is your shot," Dana had whispered. "The rest of the network will be watching. If you pull this off, you're not just the guy on Tuesday nights anymore." Still, something about the whole thing made his gut twist. Ryan had grown up watching Keanu Reeves movies. Everyone had. But over the past decade, Keanu had become more than just a Hollywood figure. He'd become something quieter, deeper. This mysterious force of goodness who appeared in subway cars, helped stranded drivers, and of course, built the Reeves Foundation. The organization claimed to provide anonymous support for terminally ill children and their families. It operated almost entirely without publicity, quietly paying for surgeries, medications, and treatments where insurance fell short. But Dana insisted it was all a front. She told him the whistleblower had proof that the foundation was actually laundering money through shell organizations. "It's a fake halo," she had said, "and you get to rip it off." Ryan didn't want to believe it, but he also didn't want to lose his chance. He had spent a decade climbing through small segments and local fluff pieces, doing stories on farmers markets and holiday light competitions, while his peers broke national headlines. So tonight, he told himself, he'd ask the hard questions. And if the helo slipped, if the truth wasn't so pure, then the public deserved to know. A knock came at the door. "2 minutes, Ryan," a production assistant called through the hallway. He closed the folder and stood, adjusting his blazer one last time. His heart pounded in his chest as he stepped out into the corridor. Lights buzzing above, crew members rushing past with earpieces and clipboards. At the end of the hallway, the set gleamed with harsh white lights and polished surfaces. A tall, empty chair sat opposite his desk, the chair where Keanu Reeves would sit. And in front of Ryan, a red light blinked above camera 3, ready to go live. The studio lights felt hotter than usual. Ryan stepped into position, his smile practiced, his expression calm. But inside, he was anything but. He could feel the weight of the folder sitting on the table in front of him. It wasn't just paper, it was a weapon. One he wasn't sure he wanted to use. Across the studio, Keanu Reeves entered quietly through the side curtain, wearing a plain black suit. No entourage, no flash. Just the same quiet dignity that had followed him for years. The audience in the small studio clapped warmly as he walked in. Keanu nodded gently, acknowledging them, but not soaking in the applause. He moved like a man who never needed a stage. Ryan stood and shook his hand. It was firm, steady, and strangely grounding. "Thank you for joining us," Ryan said, motioning for Keanu to take a seat. Keanu offered a small smile. "Thank you for having me." As they both sat down, Ryan glanced at Dana standing just off camera. She gave a short, sharp nod. The signal. He was supposed to start soft, ease in with background questions, then go for the reveal. That was the plan. That was always the plan. "Tonight," Ryan began, "we're joined by someone who needs no introduction. Actor, philanthropist, and founder of the Reeves Foundation. Keanu Reeves." The cameras panned in. Viewers across the country were already tuning in. Ryan could feel it. Every eye watching. This was the kind of interview that would be clipped, shared, and dissected within minutes. He leaned forward slightly. "I want to start," Ryan said smoothly, "with what most people know about you. The movies, the fame. But I think what's been most surprising over the years is what you've done away from the cameras." Keanu offered a humble shrug. "Most of that isn't really about me." "And yet," Ryan pressed, "your foundation has helped hundreds of children, quietly, anonymously. Why choose to stay out of the spotlight when the impact could be so much greater with more exposure?" Keanu nodded, as if he'd heard the question 100 times but still cared to answer. "Because the kids aren't stories. They're not campaigns. They're just people, families. When they're going through something unbearable, they don't need a camera in their face. They need someone to step in without asking for anything." The answer was honest, gentle, and it made Ryan hesitate. He glanced at the folder. The next question on his card was the pivot, the shift from admiration to accusation. Dana caught his eye again and mouthed the words, "Go, now." Ryan swallowed. He reached slowly for the folder, placing it deliberately in front of him. "Mr. Reeves," he said, his tone shifting slightly, "I want to bring up something that may be difficult." Keanu looked at the folder, then back at Ryan, his expression unchanged. Ryan continued, "We've received documents, financial records, tax filings, internal communications, that raise serious questions about the transparency of the Reeves Foundation." The studio fell quiet. Even the ambient hum of the equipment seemed to hold its breath. "These records," Ryan said carefully, "appear to show large sums of money being funneled to shell accounts. No medical partners listed, no public disclosure, no board of directors. Just money, moving in silence." Keanu didn't flinch, didn't blink. He simply listened. Ryan pressed, "Can you explain where this money is going, Mr. Reeves?" There it was. The question. The line he couldn't take back. And just before Keanu responded, something flickered behind his eyes. Not fear, not anger, but something deeper. Like a man staring into a familiar storm. Keanu sat still for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached into his inner jacket pocket, not for defense, not for a statement, but for a single folded photograph. He held it between his fingers without raising it up yet. Ryan, confused by the silence, glanced again at Dana. She frowned slightly, motioning for him to push harder. But Keanu finally spoke, his voice calm. "You asked where the money is going." He placed the photograph gently on the desk between them. "Face down. It's going to people no one else sees. Families insurance won't touch. Doctors with no budget. Children with no time left." Ryan hesitated, eyes drawn to the photo. "What is that?" Keanu turned it over. It was a child, bald, smiling, cheeks puffed from medication, one arm raised in a fragile thumbs up. Behind her was a dry raise board that read, "Day 89. I made it." Ryan stared at it. He wasn't ready for that. Keanu's voice grew softer. "Her name was Clara. She was 5 when I met her. The hospital wouldn't cover an experimental therapy, said the odds were too low, said it wasn't worth the cost." "And was it?" Ryan asked, trying to steady himself. Trillin lived another 3 years, learned to read, painted a mural in the children's wing before she passed. Ask the kids who walk past it every day if it was worth it. Ryan blinked. This foundation doesn't keep a board because it doesn't need one. It doesn't keep public records because the families ask us not to. You think that means we're hiding something? Keanu paused. We're hiding pain. We're hiding fear. We're keeping it quiet so kids don't have to live their last months on a stage. In the control room, Dana's jaw tightened. She reached for her headset, but the damage was already done. Ryan felt it, not in ratings, in his chest. He looked back at the folder, his weapon, and for the first time, he wasn't sure if he was still the one holding it. The audience in the studio was silent, not a cough, not a whisper. Keanu leaned forward gently. You have every right to ask questions, Ryan. But just make sure you know what you're asking about. And for the first time in his career, Ryan Maxwell didn't know what to say next. The black sedan pulled up quietly to the curb behind the studio entrance. No flashing lights, no security detail. Just one man in a simple black suit and charcoal gray overcoat, stepping out with the calm composure of someone who had nothing to prove. Keanu Reeves glanced up at the bright Channel 9 News logo above the door, nodded politely to the receptionist waiting by the entrance, and stepped inside. He didn't bring a team. No manager, no publicist, no stylist hovering around with lint rollers and last-minute notes. Just Keanu and a worn leather messenger bag slung over one shoulder. The contrast to the spectacle inside the studio couldn't have been more stark. Dozens of crew members buzzed around like bees, prepping lights, rechecking camera angles, running scripts, and whispering updates into headsets. Backstage, Ryan Maxwell paced in front of the makeup mirror for the third time, adjusting his tie with restless fingers. His assistant, Julia Lang, stood quietly nearby, scanning a tablet with a furrowed brow. You're sure you want to go through with this? Julia asked in a low voice, trying to keep her tone neutral. Keanu's not exactly the kind of guy viewers want to see ambushed. Ryan didn't look at her. This isn't about ambushing anyone, he replied sharply. This is journalism. The public has a right to know what he's doing with all that foundation money. But something about those documents still feels off, Julia pressed. They don't match the IRS summary we found last week, and the timing. Julia, Ryan cut her off. We've been through this. Bradley said the source is solid. Besides, the guy walks around like a saint. If even half of what's in that folder is true, we're doing everyone a favor. Julia lowered her eyes. She knew better than to argue once Ryan locked in. But deep down, something didn't sit right. She hadn't slept well since reviewing the final production notes the night before. The documents were too perfect. The figures too convenient. The anonymous whistleblower too quiet. Then the backstage curtain shifted and Keanu walked in. Everyone turned. Conversations dropped mid-sentence. He smiled gently, nodded to the crew, and said, "Thanks for having me." Ryan blinked. He had expected someone more polished, more armored. He expected Hollywood royalty. But Keanu Reeves looked like he'd just walked in from a quiet afternoon, reading philosophy at a used bookstore. No fanfare, just presence. Keanu's presence was quiet, but it shifted the air in the studio. The producer, Derek Bell, stepped forward with a clipboard and a quick greeting. "Mr. Reeves, thank you for joining us tonight. You'll be seated stage right. Ryan will introduce you, live in the first 60 seconds. Keanu nodded. "Understood. Appreciate the invitation. No questions, no notes, no handlers needing to approve anything." He wasn't even wearing makeup. Derek blinked, slightly disarmed. "Would you like a touch-up before you go on?" Keanu glanced at his reflection in a small dressing mirror nearby. "I think people can handle a few wrinkles." The makeup artist, already holding her brush, paused mid-step and smiled. Meanwhile, Julia stood off to the side, watching everything unfold. Keanu moved like a man with nothing to hide. He didn't fidget. He didn't scroll his phone or ask about camera angles. He just walked to the edge of the curtain and looked toward the audience, calm as still water. Ryan, watching from the opposite side of the set, found his confidence wavering. Something about Keanu's composure unsettled him. This wasn't the defensiveness of someone hiding corruption. This was stillness, introspective and real, and that made Ryan nervous. He flipped through the notes again, page after page of financial printouts, statements, graphs, words like fraud, tax loophole, and hidden spending highlighted in red. They had rehearsed it. The angles, the cuts, the key lines to land before the first commercial break. The plan was airtight. If everything held together, tonight would be the story that catapulted his name. He'd been told Keanu was cagey in interviews, guarded, maybe even a little evasive. But now, standing there watching the man barely speak to anyone, hands in his coat pockets, looking at the audience like he was already past all of it, Ryan felt something tug deep in his gut. Doubt. He turned to Julia again. "You sure we're set on everything?" Julia's mouth opened, but she hesitated. She saw it too. "Everything's set. But, Ryan, save it," he said quickly. "This is happening." The sound engineer gave the final 2-minute warning. Studio lights came on full glow. Stagehands gave thumbs up. Ryan took his seat behind the polished oak desk as the theme music played in his earpiece. Across from him, the guest chair remained empty, just for a few more moments. Keanu stepped into the wings, then paused. He looked at Julia. "Don't worry," he said softly. "The truth has its own gravity." Then he walked into the light. The theme music faded. The red tally light on camera 1 blinked to life. "We're live in 5, 4, 3. Ryan exhaled through his nose, forcing a smile onto his face as the director's hand dropped. "Good evening, America," he said smoothly. "Tonight, we welcome a special guest. You know him as an actor, a philanthropist, and the man behind some of the most iconic roles in Hollywood." Applause from the studio audience followed, on cue. "But tonight, we're asking different questions, hard questions." He turned to the right. "Please welcome Keanu Reeves." Another round of applause rose as Keanu walked calmly into frame, his gait unhurried. He wore a charcoal suit with no tie, his long black coat neatly buttoned. The applause didn't faze him. He gave a slight bow toward the audience before turning toward Ryan. They shook hands. "Thank you for being here, Mr. Reeves," Ryan began, settling into his practiced tone. Keanu gave a slight smile. "Thanks for having me." The camera zoomed in, framing the two in a classic head-to-head format. Behind them, the set design was sleek and minimal, a glowing digital skyline, and a ticker of headlines that subtly rolled across the bottom. Ryan adjusted his posture, leaning in just slightly. "Let's begin where many have questions. Your foundation, the Reeves Foundation. It's known for being quiet, discreet, but it's also been called vague, unregulated, hard to track." Keanu met his eyes without blinking. "That's true. We don't advertise what we do." Ryan held up a slim folder. "We've obtained some documents that suggest the foundation might be operating outside of normal charitable transparency standards. Large sums are moved, no clear reports, no PR campaigns. That's not illegal, necessarily, but many viewers at home might wonder, why the secrecy?" There it was. The opening probe. The audience was silent, watching. Keanu nodded, thoughtful. "That's a fair question." Ryan sat back slightly. He hadn't expected agreement. Keanu continued, "The foundation doesn't seek publicity. We believe that when you start helping people just to be seen helping, you're not really helping anymore." Julia watched from the side of the stage, her hands clenched behind her back. She could see Ryan falter. Just a beat, but he kept going. "Well, intent aside," Ryan said, Some would argue that secrecy breeds suspicion. We have records here showing hundreds of thousands of dollars routed to unnamed facilities. Anonymous accounts. Would you care to comment on where exactly that money is going? Keanu looked at the folder. Are those the same documents your producer handed you yesterday? Ryan blinked. Excuse me? You didn't obtain those documents. They were handed to you. The camera held tight on Ryan's face. There was a twitch of the brow, an almost imperceptible movement in the corner of his mouth. Keanu's voice remained soft, steady. I know where those documents came from, and I know who wants this interview to go a certain way. But I agreed to be here because I believe the truth doesn't need defense. It just needs air. Ryan glanced at the teleprompter. It was useless now. The conversation had veered off script. Behind the control booth, Julia stared at the monitor, her mouth slightly open. Keanu wasn't defensive. He wasn't angry. He was composed. And somehow, that made the next moment feel 10 times heavier. Keanu leaned forward gently. Ryan, may I ask you a question? Ryan froze. The camera zoomed in again, and the room seemed to hold its breath. The moment the red on-air light flashed, a hush fell over the studio. Millions of viewers tuned in across the country. Ryan Maxwell straightened in his seat, adjusted his tie, and gave the camera a confident, practiced smile. Good evening, America, he said smoothly. Tonight we welcome an international icon, actor, producer, and now philanthropist, Mr. Keanu Reeves. The audience clapped politely as the camera panned to Keanu, seated opposite Ryan. Keanu wore a simple black suit with no tie, his long hair loosely tucked behind his ears. He nodded once to the crowd and offered a soft smile. Thank you for having me, he said calmly. Ryan's smile barely flickered. The honor is ours. Now, let's get right into it. He tapped the folder on his desk. Thick, marked, and ready. You've recently made headlines for what some call a mysterious organization, the Reeves Foundation. Keanu nodded slightly. Yes. Ryan leaned forward. It's been described as one of the most opaque nonprofits in Hollywood. No website, no staff listings, no social media, and yet millions of dollars appear to flow through it every year. Where exactly is that money going, Mr. Reeves? There was a moment of silence. Keanu didn't blink. He didn't glance at the folder. He simply let the pause hang in the air before answering. To the people who need it, he said. Ryan kept his voice smooth but pressed harder. That's quite a vague answer, wouldn't you agree? He opened the folder with a theatrical gesture. We've obtained financial documents from someone claiming to be an insider. They say the Reeves Foundation is nothing more than a ghost charity, a tax shelter with no direct beneficiaries, no oversight, and no transparency. Murmurs echoed through the live audience. Even some of the camera operators shifted slightly, sensing the shift in tension. Keanu didn't flinch. Those papers, he said gently. Do they include the names of the children? Ryan paused, caught off guard by the question. Excuse me? Keanu leaned forward slightly. The children, the ones we've helped, do. Those documents list the names of the kids who are alive because of the foundation? Ryan blinked. That's not the point of this investigation, isn't it? Keanu replied quietly. There was a noticeable change in the room. The tension didn't fade. It shifted, from anticipation to discomfort, from excitement to unease. Ryan took a quick breath, shuffled his papers, and prepared for the next phase. Ryan tried to regain control, tapping his pen against the folder as if to reassert dominance. Mr. Reeves, you have to understand, this is not about feelings. This is about facts. The records we've reviewed show over $7 million routed through shell accounts. There are no publicly named staff, no transparency reports. That's not how real charities operate. Keanu didn't blink. Transparency can sometimes expose the innocent to harm. Ryan raised his eyebrows. Harm? Are you saying these children you're helping are in danger? Keanu looked at him, quiet for a moment, then replied evenly. I'm saying that children undergoing life-or-death procedures don't need camera crews outside their doors. There was a ripple in the audience, subtle but present. A few murmured in agreement. Ryan pressed on. So, you admit the foundation avoids the spotlight, but you've also funded procedures that major insurance providers label experimental. Gene therapy, neuromuscular implants. Yes, Keanu said softly. Without oversight. Without public review. Some of these procedures failed. Keanu's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained steady. Yes, some failed, because not every fight ends in victory. But they weren't experiments. They were last chances, for children no one else would touch. That silenced Ryan for half a beat. Behind the scenes, Julia Lang, the assistant producer, leaned forward at the control desk. She looked toward her supervisor, who simply shook his head. Stay the course. Ryan wasn't about to lose momentum. Let's talk about the name Gabriel Santos. Ring a bell? Keanu nodded slowly. Ryan flipped a page. Diagnosed with late-stage leukemia. His parents claim your foundation offered to pay for an unapproved stem cell transplant. He died 6 months later. Keanu looked at the floor for a brief second, then raised his eyes again. Gabriel was 12. He had a smile that could stop time. His mother called me personally. Insurance had denied them. Twice. We gave him the only shot left. And he still died, Ryan said pointedly. Yes, Keanu said, and for the first time, emotion cracked slightly in his voice. But he died knowing someone believed he was worth fighting for. That sentence hit the audience like a wave. Ryan tried to keep the pressure. But what if that treatment shortened his life? What if your foundation hastened his death? Keanu leaned forward. You think love hastens death, Ryan? Silence. You think dignity is measured in days on a chart? Ryan faltered. The line of questioning was slipping. The narrative was unraveling. Keanu took a slow breath. His mother sent me a letter after he passed. She said, "Thank you for giving us hope when the world gave us none." I didn't save Gabriel's life, but I helped give him peace. For the first time, Ryan looked down, not at his notes, but at his own reflection in the glass of the table. And Keanu sat back, composed again, waiting. Ryan turned a page, his fingers twitching just slightly. Let's talk about the paper trail, or lack of one. The Reeves Foundation has no listed board members, no annual reports, no salaried staff. Everything is routed through a single trust in Wyoming. Keanu nodded again without hesitation. Correct. Why the secrecy? Keanu met his eyes. Because this isn't a performance, it's a promise. Ryan pressed. But even private charities disclose something. You've operated for over a decade, yet there's no trace, no website, no tax breakdowns, nothing in public view. You're asking America to believe in a ghost. No, Keanu said calmly. I'm asking them to believe in what comes from the quiet. Ryan paused, momentarily confused. The quiet? Keanu's voice lowered. The moments when no one is watching. No red carpets, no interviews, just a child in a hospital bed wondering if anyone remembers they exist. There was a long silence. Even the camera operators had stopped moving. The studio air had grown heavy. Transparency matters, Ryan said finally, but the edge in his voice had dulled. So does privacy, Keanu replied gently, especially for the forgotten. Ryan opened another folder. Okay, let's try this. Your foundation reportedly spent $2,300,000, 0 cents, on one family alone, the Tran family in Houston. Their child had a rare spinal condition. The surgery was rejected by every major insurer. You covered it. Why? Because no one else would, Keanu answered. With that amount of money on one child? That child's name is Lily Tran. She's 9 years old. Her mother works as a janitor at a high school. Her father is legally blind. They exhausted every loan, every option. By the time I found out, Lily had 2 weeks left to walk. Not live. Walk. Ryan hesitated. Did the surgery work? Keanu gave the faintest smile. She danced at her school talent show last month. A collective breath left the room. Julia, still watching from the control room, whispered under her breath, "Why didn't we lead with that?" Ryan leaned back, visibly shaken. His rhythm was gone. Keanu remained still. Ryan's voice grew quiet. "Why keep this hidden? You could have been celebrated for this. Awards, headlines. You could be the hero." Keanu looked down at his hands. "I don't want to be the story." Then he looked up. "They are." The audience shifted again. This time not in suspicion, but in awe. A quiet weight had settled over the room. Keanu added softly, "If even one person watching tonight looks at a struggling family with more compassion, then this was worth it." Ryan sat silent. His questions remained, but the answers were changing him. And behind the glass, Julia Lang, his assistant, was already drafting a message she never thought she'd write. "We got the story, but not the one we planned." The studio lights hummed quietly above as Ryan shifted in his seat, the folders still open on the desk in front of him. He had just finished his third question, each one sharper than the last, every sentence crafted to put Keanu on the defensive. And yet, Keanu hadn't flinched. Not once. He sat in perfect stillness, his hands folded loosely on his lap, his posture relaxed, calm. Not smug, not shaken, just still. The silence stretched longer than anyone expected. Viewers at home were probably gripping their remotes, waiting for the fireworks. Ryan leaned forward, adjusting the angle of the microphone slightly, eager to push harder. But before he could speak, Keanu's voice broke the silence. "Have you ever heard the name Eva Santana?" Ryan blinked. The question was so far off script, so unexpected, he wasn't sure he heard it right. "I'm sorry?" he asked, leaning in again. "Eva Santana," Keanu repeated gently. "She's 9 years old." Ryan hesitated. He flicked through a few of the pages on his desk, skimming for the name. It wasn't there. "No," he said carefully. "Should I have?" Keanu nodded once, very slowly. "Maybe. Maybe not. But Eva doesn't have time to wait for people to learn her name." The tension in the studio shifted. The sound engineers in the back glanced up from their monitors. Camera 2 panned slowly toward Keanu's face. She was diagnosed with an extremely rare form of acute lymphoblastic leukemia, Keanu continued, his voice quiet, even. Standard treatments failed. Her best chance now is a bone marrow transplant. A matched donor was finally found 3 weeks ago. Ryan opened his mouth, unsure whether to interrupt. His notes didn't say anything about this. No one had mentioned a sick child. Keanu turned to face the audience, his gaze steady. "The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning," he said, "at St. Jude Medical in Denver." He paused, just long enough to let the weight of the words settle. "It's fully paid for," Keanu added, "in full. No GoFundMe, no press, no headlines." A single breath passed before he looked back at Ryan. It was covered by the Reeves Foundation, the one you just called a ghost charity. The air in the studio froze. The audience, previously leaning in with curiosity, now sat stunned. Even the camera operator seemed to pause mid-movement. Ryan's throat went dry. Ryan cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the moment. "That's, if true, a very generous gesture. But with all due respect, Mr. Reeves, one child's story doesn't explain the absence of public records. The lack of documentation, of visible staff or transactions." Keanu didn't blink. "Ava isn't the only child," he said. "She's just the one who couldn't wait." He reached slowly into the inside pocket of his jacket, and pulled out a small stack of folded papers, each one worn around the edges. Without looking down, he began placing them, one by one, on the desk between them. Age 6. Age 6. Inoperable tumor. Operated on 3 months ago. Another sheet. Lana, age 14. A rare autoimmune disorder. Medication cost $80,000, denied by insurance. Another. Tariq, 8 years old. Experimental spinal surgery. Walked again last week. Each paper was simple. A letter. A note from a parent. A crayon drawing. Ryan stared at them, not sure what he was looking at. Proof? Props? Emotionally manipulative anecdotes? Keanu paused, his hand resting gently on the final paper. This one's from Eva. She drew it after I visited her last month. I didn't go as a celebrity, I went as a promise. He carefully unfolded the drawing. It showed a little girl with wide eyes and a hospital gown, standing beside a tall man in black with messy hair. They were holding hands, beneath what looked like a big white heart floating in the sky. At the bottom, in pink marker, were the words, "Thank you, Mr. K." The audience gasped softly. Ryan sat back, his pulse unsteady. He could feel the eyes of everyone, production crew, camera techs, even the live audience, all turning from him toward Keanu. The momentum had shifted. "This isn't about headlines," Keanu said softly. "And it's never been about me." "But why the secrecy?" Ryan asked, voice quieter now. "Why hide all this? Why make it so difficult to verify?" Keanu looked up slowly. "Because children should never be used to sell stories. Not mine, not yours, not even the ones we save." Ryan hesitated. "And the foundation records?" "They're real," Keanu replied, "but intentionally protected. We don't fundraise, we don't advertise. Every operation is routed through direct provider relationships. Hospitals, caseworkers, social workers who know these families by name, not by number. It's slower, harder, but safer. For them." The silence that followed was no longer skeptical. It was reverent. Then Julia Lang, Ryan's assistant, emerged quietly from the side of the stage, whispering urgently in his earpiece. "There's a call on hold," she murmured. "It's from St. Jude Medical. They said it's about Eva." Ryan blinked. "Now?" "They heard the name," she said. "They said they need to speak. Urgently." He looked toward the director, who was already gesturing to open the line live. Ryan nodded. "All right," he said to the audience. "We have a surprise. Joining us now by phone is Dr. Helena Ward from St. Jude Medical in Denver. Dr. Ward, are you there?" A woman's voice came through, clear and composed. "Yes, I'm here, thank you. I just wanted to confirm, for the sake of clarity, what Mr. Reeves just said is true. The full cost of Eva Santana's surgery was covered by a single anonymous payment from an account labeled only Reeves Foundation. We've never spoken with Mr. Reeves directly, but the funds arrived the same day our billing department received the match confirmation. Without it, the surgery wouldn't be possible." The audience broke into quiet applause. Some were already wiping their eyes. Keanu didn't speak. He only nodded once, slowly. The applause faded, but the silence that followed carried weight. It wasn't awkward or confused, it was reverent, like something sacred had just been revealed. Ryan stared at Keanu, the edges of his confidence fraying fast. "You could have come on here and told us about this from the start," he said, his voice quieter now. "You could have defended yourself?" Keanu finally looked at him, not with anger, but with something deeper. "Ryan, this was never about me. It was about Ava and Lana and Dimitri. If defending myself required sacrificing their dignity or turning their pain into entertainment, then I'd rather be misunderstood." Ryan swallowed hard. "But people want answers. They want proof that the Reeves Foundation isn't just smoke and mirrors." "They don't need my face to trust the truth," Keanu replied. "They need results. And every child who's still alive because of this invisible foundation, that's proof enough for me." Julia stood at the edge of the set, tears lining her eyes now. The production crew had stopped moving. The cameras stayed trained, but no one behind them dared make a sound. "Dr. Ward," Ryan said into the mic, "is Eva ready for surgery tomorrow?" "She is," came the calm reply. "And she told us this morning, quote, 'I'm not scared. Mr. K says I'm stronger than the sickness.' She wanted to make sure we told you that." Keanu smiled faintly. He didn't need to say a word. That smile, small, honest, and quiet, said everything. And for the first time that night, Ryan didn't have a rebuttal. He had no script left to follow. Only the sudden, sinking feeling that the story he thought he'd been telling had never belonged to him at all. He looked down at the folder on his desk. His evidence. Pages of bank statements, numbers, arrows connecting names and accounts now felt like noise next to a child's drawing. One drawing, one life. And it was more powerful than any headline. The red light on the camera remained on, waiting. But in that moment, no one moved. No one spoke. Because something bigger than television had just happened, and everyone in the room knew it. The studio lights felt warmer now. Ryan's collar clung to his neck, and a faint sheen of sweat had formed on his brow. He tried not to blink too quickly, not to show the tension building in his spine. The folder in front of him, his supposed weapon, still sat unopened since Keanu's mention of Ava Santana. But he had to regain control. This was live television. "I think the audience deserves facts," Ryan said, mustering a confident tone. The Reeves Foundation raised over $7 million last year, and according to these reports, he held up the folder. More than $5 million went toward administrative costs. Yet there's no record of a staff, no press releases, no offices. Doesn't that strike you as odd? Keanu didn't flinch. His posture was still relaxed, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, calm and clear. "Have you ever had to choose between rent and your child's chemo?" The audience didn't move. Ryan hesitated, unsure whether to respond. Keanu continued. "Those numbers are accurate, but the assumption behind them is not. That $5 million didn't disappear. It paid for surgery, for transport, for meals during recovery. It didn't go to some executive board or PR team. It went to hospitals. Directly. Quietly." Ryan frowned. "So, you're saying no family ever sees the money?" "Correct," Keanu said. "No family should have to fill out grant forms while their child is dying. We get a call from a hospital social worker, we verify the case, and we pay the invoice, directly to the billing department." "Easy to say," Ryan shot back, "but where's the proof?" Keanu nodded, as if he'd been waiting for that question. He reached into his coat pocket and retrieved a small notepad. Flipping through it, he paused, then read from the page. Case 1143. Miguel Alvarez, age 6, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Texas Children's Hospital. Paid invoice dated March 18th. Full chemo cycle covered. Case 1148. Jasmine Monroe, age 3, spinal neuroblastoma, LL. Children's Hospital. Covered surgical cost, transport, post-op therapy. Ryan's mouth opened slightly, but Keanu wasn't done. Case 1150. Daniel Lang, 6 years old. Severe cardiac arrhythmia, emergency surgery at Mount Sinai, fully paid on February 11th. A sharp breath came from behind Ryan. He turned, startled. Julia Lang had frozen. Her hand hovered mid-air. Her clipboard slipped from her grasp and hit the studio floor with a dull thud. "A nephew," she whispered. Keanu looked at her. Their eyes met for just a second, and Keanu gave a slow nod. "He made it," he said quietly. Julia's face paled. Her eyes welled with tears. Ryan stared at her, stunned. Julia turned to him. You never told me what was in the folder, Ryan. I didn't know, Ryan stammered. You should have, she said. The studio had gone completely quiet. Ryan didn't know where to look. At Julia, who was visibly trembling, or at Keanu, who had just dismantled half the accusations with a notepad and a calm voice. Julia's eyes shimmered as she stepped forward, no longer just a quiet assistant behind the scenes. Daniel almost died. They told my brother the surgery would cost $200,000 and insurance wasn't going to cover it. We didn't know what to do. Then out of nowhere, the hospital said the bill was paid. No explanation, just cleared. She turned to Keanu. We never knew who did it. We thought it was a mistake. You saved him? Keanu gave a humble nod. Not me. The foundation. I just make sure the right people get help. Daniel deserved to grow up, that's all. Julia covered her mouth with her hand, trying to keep from sobbing on live television. Behind the camera, several crew members had gone still, some whispering to each other. Ryan's grip on the folder tightened. The power he thought he had, these documents, the supposed exposé, now felt like dead weight. He flipped through them anyway, desperate for something, anything. These emails, Ryan insisted, holding one up. They show no employees, no board members. It looks like it's all run from a P.O. box. Keanu didn't react. That's because it is, he replied. Ryan blinked. There's no staff because every donation goes to children. We use encrypted, secure systems. The P.O. box is used to receive hospital statements and referrals, not fan mail. There's no marketing department, no media team, just action. Ryan opened another folder, growing frantic now. But there's no website. We don't advertise saving lives. But there's no public accounting. There is, it's filed with the IRS, but we don't share individual stories unless the families give consent. We value their dignity more than our reputation. Another silence followed. Keanu continued, more gently now. You see administrative costs and assume corruption. But we don't pay administrators, we pay hospitals. That line item you keep circling? It's what covered Daniel Lang's oxygen chamber for post-op healing. It's what got Jasmine Monroe her flight to the Mayo Clinic. Ryan felt the ground shift beneath him. But why stay anonymous? He asked, more softly now. Why not tell people what you're doing? Keanu looked out across the studio. Because the children deserve privacy. Their stories aren't mine to tell. Their battles aren't a brand. He paused, then looked at Julia. Until tonight, I didn't even know Daniel was your nephew. We never asked for thank yous. Julia wiped her face, a half laugh escaping her. You never asked for anything. Ryan stood frozen. The red light on the camera still burned bright, broadcasting his unraveling. He had come here to expose a fraud. But the only fraud in the room now seemed to be the assumption that quiet generosity must be a cover for something sinister. Then Keanu spoke again. And by the way, Ryan, you missed 12 more names. Would you like me to share them? Ryan's throat was dry. 12 more? 12 children your producer left out of the folder, children whose lives were saved in just the past 3 months. Would you like their names? Ryan hesitated, then shook his head faintly. No, he said, voice barely above a whisper. I think I've heard enough. But Keanu wasn't done. He gently placed another small stack of papers on the desk. These weren't accusations. They were hospital invoices, anonymized, but with confirmed signatures from medical directors across the country. One from Boston General, one from Seattle Children's, one from a mobile surgical unit in Kentucky. All paid in full by the Reeves Foundation. All marked urgent. All dated within the last 60 days. Keanu slid them forward slowly. Every one of these transfers was marked administrative cost. But to the child who woke up with a new kidney, it meant life. To the girl who got her leukemia treatment on time, it meant she got to go back to school. To the parents who didn't have to sell their house to pay for care, it meant they got to keep being a family. Julia sat down, her hands trembling. Ryan looked at the invoices like they were in another language. All of his assumptions, all of his certainty were falling apart. He felt exposed. But Keanu's voice softened. "You weren't wrong to ask questions, Ryan. Journalists should question power. You just pointed the spotlight in the wrong direction." That landed with a thud. Ryan swallowed hard. "Then, help me point it the right way." Keanu finally smiled. Not smugly, just kindly. "I will. But first, I need to tell you about someone named Gabriel. He's 8. He draws space stations when he's scared, and if we don't move quickly, his treatment window closes in 4 days." Ryan didn't speak. He just nodded. And in that moment, something shifted. Not in the documents or in the camera feed, but in the studio air itself. For the first time since the interview began, the room no longer felt like a battleground. It felt like a reckoning. Ryan glanced over at Julia. She nodded. The folder on the desk, once so important, now sat ignored and unopened. Keanu didn't gloat. He simply waited. And with the smallest voice he'd used all night, Ryan leaned forward and said, "Tell me about Gabriel." And the world leaned in to listen. The studio was unnaturally quiet as Keanu reached into his jacket pocket and retrieved a folded slip of paper. He didn't look at Ryan. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "There's someone I'd like you to hear from." Ryan blinked, uncertain whether this was a diversion or part of the plan. Before he could respond, Keanu unfolded the paper and read out a number to the producer offstage. There was a brief pause, and then the call was patched directly into the studio feed. A woman's voice came on the line. Shaky at first, but clear. "This is Denise Carver," she said, her tone careful but steady. Keanu turned slightly toward the camera, his voice soft. "Denise, I know this wasn't scheduled, but I think your story matters. Would you mind sharing what happened?" There was a pause. Then Denise spoke, slowly at first. "My daughter, Lila, was born with a rare blood disorder. Insurance called the treatment experimental. We were told she had 6 months at most. I tried everything, every loan, every fundraiser. No one returned my calls. Until one day I got an email, no name, just instructions to contact a hospital in Boston. They told me the bill was paid in full." The audience shifted. Even Ryan leaned forward now. Keanu kept his eyes on the desk. "Tell them what happened after." Denise's voice cracked. The next morning, a man showed up at Lila's hospital room. He didn't say who he was, wore a hoodie and sunglasses. He didn't bring a camera crew. He just stood beside me while I cried. He cried with me. He held my hand. He told Lila she was brave. I didn't recognize him until days later when I saw a clip of him from a movie. "It was you." Julia Lang looked over at Ryan from behind the camera, her mouth slightly open. Ryan's throat was dry. He tried to speak, but the words didn't come. Denise continued, "I didn't come here to defend a foundation. I came here to say thank you. Because that ghost charity you just accused? It gave me more time with my little girl. She turned 5 last week." Keanu closed his eyes for a second, then nodded solemnly. "That's all I needed you to say, Denise. Thank you." Ryan shifted in his chair, visibly rattled. But the audience had already turned. Something had changed in the room. The story was no longer about paper trails. It was about people. The silence following Denise's call stretched longer than expected. Not the awkward silence of technical difficulty, but the stunned kind. The kind that wraps itself around a room like a fog and makes people forget they're on camera. Ryan stared down at the documents still spread before him, the pages that had once felt like power in his hands. Now they looked pale, irrelevant, weightless. He reached for one of them, almost out of instinct, but didn't lift it. He knew he couldn't counter what they'd all just heard. Keanu didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He simply let the truth rest where it belonged. in the voice of a mother who had once feared she would bury her daughter. Then, he did something that turned that moment from powerful to unforgettable. He looked directly into the main camera and said, "There are more Denises out there. So many. We never post about them. We don't list their names. We don't ask for applause. But they're out there. They're the reason we keep going." In the control room, the lighting technician whispered, "My cousin was one of them." No one responded, but heads nodded. These were people who had worked in broadcast news for years, seen politicians cry, celebrities break down. But this was different. Ryan cleared his throat. He tried to recover, to redirect. "Mr. Reeves, even if this foundation does help people, and I'm not saying it doesn't, how do you explain the total absence of transparency? No official board, no payroll, no public tax filings. Isn't that suspicious?" Keanu turned his gaze to him, calm and measured. "Do you know how many times families write to us in desperation? Sometimes they don't want help made public. Sometimes their child's condition is private. And sometimes it's just a matter of time. There's no committee to delay it. There's no staff to debate the cost. We act. Immediately." Ryan tried again. "But there's no staff, no volunteers. Who's making these decisions?" Keanu leaned back slightly. "I do." The answer landed harder than anyone expected. A few gasps, subtle but audible. It was too direct, too raw to be rehearsed. "You?" Ryan repeated. "Yes, every request, every letter, every doctor's note. I read them myself. I call the hospitals directly. If the case is legitimate and urgent, we fund it. We pay the hospital directly. The families never touch the money. That's why there's no paperwork trail like you're expecting." Julia Lang's expression shifted behind the cameras. There was something in Keanu's words that triggered a flicker of memory. Her eyes narrowed. Ryan reached for another folder. "But the money? Millions of dollars? It all comes from you?" "Mostly," Keanu replied. "Some from friends who've seen the impact, a few anonymous donors over the years, but I fund the majority through my production profits. It's not a foundation for publicity. It's a promise, one I made a long time ago." "Made to whom?" Ryan asked, not as a journalist now, but as a man who genuinely wanted to understand. Keanu looked down, hesitated. "We'll get there." And that pause, that quiet withheld detail, made every person watching lean in. Not just in the studio, but across the country, across every screen where the interview aired. Ryan looked toward the control room, expecting someone to signal a break, but no one moved. Everyone wanted to hear more. And Julia, still staring, suddenly whispered something under her breath. "Oh my God, I think I know one of those names." Julia Lang's voice was low, but in the stunned silence of the control room, it carried. She stepped forward from behind the cameras, her hands trembling slightly as she held her tablet. "Eva Santana?" she said aloud, eyes darting toward Keanu. "You mentioned her earlier. That name... It's familiar because she's my nephew's best friend. They're both in the pediatric oncology unit in Boston." Ryan turned, confused. "What did you say?" Julia looked directly at him. "My sister's son, Jared, has leukemia. He was in the same ward as Eva. I remember because Eva's family couldn't afford the transplant. They were about to be sent home. Then suddenly the procedure was approved. No explanation, just a call from the hospital saying it was paid for by an anonymous fund." Keanu gave a small nod but said nothing. Julia swallowed hard. "You paid for that, didn't you?" Still, Keanu didn't answer. But the look in his eyes told her everything. Julia's voice cracked. "My family prayed for a miracle, and you were the answer. I didn't even know." The audience began to murmur again, a sound like waves rolling through the room. What had started as a takedown was unraveling into something else, something none of them had expected. Ryan looked lost, his outline blurred under the harsh studio lights. Why not say any of this before? Why not tell the world? Keanu finally answered, his voice even softer than before. Because no child should be someone's headline, and no parent should have to parade their pain to earn help. Julia stepped closer to the guest chair, emotion overtaking her. All these years, I've worked in this studio, read scripts, written intros, stood behind cameras, and I never knew the person quietly saving my family was standing right in front of me. Keanu rose to meet her. He didn't offer words, just opened his arms, and Julia stepped into the hug like a daughter finding a father after a long storm. The audience clapped softly, not out of applause, but in reverence. It was the kind of moment that felt sacred. And then one of the producers in the control booth whispered, "Phones are lighting up. Hundreds of calls, people asking how to donate." Ryan sat frozen. The script in his lap no longer mattered. He looked across the table at Keanu Reeves, the man he was meant to humiliate. Instead, all he could think was, what if I've been wrong this whole time? And Keanu, sensing it, gently said, "We haven't failed when we're wrong, only when we refuse to listen." The studio was unnaturally still. Ryan Maxwell stared at the papers in front of him, trying to recover from the emotional blow dealt by the live call with Denise Carver. Her voice still lingered in the air. Her story of Keanu Reeves showing up in disguise, crying quietly in a corner room of a children's hospital. It wasn't part of the script Ryan had rehearsed. His throat felt dry. His producer's voice crackled faintly in his earpiece, trying to steer him back on track, but Ryan wasn't sure where that track was anymore. From offstage, Julia Lang was watching everything, her arms crossed tightly, her jaw locked. She had stayed quiet long enough. But something Keanu had said minutes ago had triggered something in her memory. When he listed the names of children the foundation had helped, one had struck her like a bolt of lightning. Caleb Lang, her nephew, her sister's little boy. She hadn't told Ryan, not yet. Now, she held a thin manila folder in her hands. She had pulled it just 10 minutes earlier from the network's internal archives, a place few others thought to check anymore. It was stamped with a faded red sticker marked 1983 closed case. She hadn't even known such records were still kept here. She stepped forward. Ryan didn't notice her approach at first, not until she reached his desk and gently laid the folder beside his elbow. "What's this?" he asked, forcing a smile for the cameras, his voice teetering on forced calm. "Something you forgot, Ryan," Julia replied, her tone steady but clipped. She didn't address the camera. She was speaking only to him. "Something you should have remembered before tonight." He looked at her, confused. "I found this while fact-checking your story earlier," she continued. "Didn't think it mattered." Until Keanu mentioned the year 1983. She pushed the folder toward him. "That's when you were 6, right?" The audience was silent, watching Ryan's every reaction. With visible hesitation, Ryan flipped the folder open. Inside was a copy of a hospital invoice, a big one, dated July 4, 1983, pediatric emergency surgery. A boy named Ryan Maxwell, appendectomy, ICU care, 5 nights. Below the itemized list was a single line written in careful typewriter font. Paid in full. Donor. The Reeves Assistance Fund. Ryan's face paled. The blood drained from his cheeks as his eyes locked on the name. The Reeves Assistance Fund. He knew that name. It was the former name of the current foundation Keanu operated. A tiny, early version, long before the public ever knew about it. His lips parted, but no words came out. Julia stepped back, her expression unreadable. Ryan looked up, confused, cornered, and shaken. Keanu's voice broke the silence. "I've never told that story in public," he said gently. "But that fund saved a lot of us back then. Quietly, anonymously." including one little boy in Boston who almost didn't make it to his 7th birthday. Ryan lowered the folder, his hands trembling now. Ryan's fingers curled around the edges of the folder, like it might disappear if he let go. The studio lights didn't seem as hot anymore, just blinding. He opened his mouth to speak, but all that came out was a small, stunned breath. He looked at Julia, then at Keanu, then back down at the paper. His name, his birth date, his hospital, his miracle. He remembered it now. The ambulance siren, the cold, sterile ceiling tiles, the doctor whispering something to a nurse as they wheeled him away. He remembered the pain, sharp and seizing, and he remembered his mother crying in the hallway, begging the hospital staff to go ahead with the surgery even though she didn't have the money. They had no insurance then. She was a single parent, and they couldn't afford even a night in that hospital, let alone a full operation. But the next morning, a nurse had walked in and quietly told her the bill had been taken care of. No name, just an anonymous foundation. She'd never stopped wondering who had saved her son's life. And now, nearly 4 decades later, the answer had walked into the studio in a black suit with tired eyes and a gentle voice. Keanu hadn't come to defend himself. He'd come to finish something he started long ago. Julia stepped forward again, this time addressing the camera. The Reeves Assistance Fund was a shadow organization before it became the formal foundation we know today, she explained, her voice steady. Its mission wasn't to create headlines. It was to quietly pay off medical debt for children whose families had nowhere else to turn. There was no PR department, no marketing campaign. Just a man with a list of names, writing checks in the dark. Ryan stood up, folder still in hand. He turned to face Keanu, struggling to maintain his composure. "You knew," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "You knew about this, about me, didn't you?" Keanu nodded once. "I didn't at first," he admitted. "Not until I saw your name on the guest list for tonight. But I remembered the case. A little boy in Boston. One of our first. You were number 6. "Number 6? Ryan whispered. "There were hundreds before the foundation ever had a name," Keanu said. "You were one of them." The audience sat in absolute silence, as if afraid any sound might break the gravity of what was unfolding. "I came here to expose you," Ryan said, "to tear you down, and all this time?" Keanu took a step forward. "All this time, Ryan. You were the story." Ryan couldn't speak, not yet, so Keanu continued. "This foundation wasn't created for publicity. It was built because I knew what it felt like to be helpless, to be forgotten, to watch someone you love suffer and not be able to fix it. My childhood gave me that pain, so I started answering it, one name at a time." Keanu gestured toward the folder in Ryan's hand. "Your life was one of the first steps." Ryan's lips trembled. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I never knew who it was." "You weren't supposed to," Keanu replied softly. "It was never about being seen. It was about saving someone. Just in time." Ryan looked down again at the page. He touched the faded ink, as if it might somehow connect him back to that exact moment in 1983, the day his life was saved by a stranger who'd quietly walked away. Ryan stayed silent. His fingers tightened around the edge of the folder, knuckles turning white. The studio lights above him no longer felt empowering. They felt like interrogation lamps. For the first time in his career, Ryan didn't know what to say. Not a single word in his teleprompter could help him now. "I didn't know," he finally whispered. But Keanu's gaze remained gentle. "You weren't supposed to," Keanu said. "We never wanted recognition. The fund was created to be invisible, so kids could live without ever feeling indebted." Ryan's eyes met Keanu's. "But why me?" Keanu paused, then offered a quiet nod toward Julia. "I didn't know who you were until Julia showed me that file backstage," he said. but I recognized the story. A child pulled from a wreck, a single mother with no insurance. It was one of the first cases we ever helped. You don't remember? Ryan's mind was spinning. I remember. Pain, tubes, my mother crying. That's all. Then maybe that's enough, Keanu said. You survived. You grew up. And tonight, you got to see what that survival meant, not just for you, but for all the others. Julia's voice broke in, firm but kind. That little boy from 1983? He became the journalist who nearly destroyed the foundation that saved him. Ryan sat back in his chair. He wasn't angry. He wasn't defensive anymore. He looked lost. Like a man standing in front of a mirror that suddenly reflected a part of himself he had buried decades ago. I wanted to be the one who exposed something fake, Ryan said quietly. But everything I attacked tonight was real. Keanu leaned forward slightly. You're not the only one who's made that mistake, he said. But the real test isn't whether you're right the first time. It's what you do when you realize you were wrong. The control room didn't interrupt. No one spoke into Ryan's earpiece. Even the floor manager stood frozen by the camera rig, eyes wide. Live TV had turned into something else, something none of them had expected. Ryan finally looked up again. There's a lot I don't remember from that time, he said. But if what you're saying is true, he paused, voice catching, then I owe you everything. And tonight, I almost repaid that with a knife. Keanu didn't flinch. You don't owe me, he said simply. You owe it forward. The screen behind them went dark as the segment ended. But the conversation was far from over. The lights in the studio dimmed slightly, the weight of what had just been revealed hanging thick in the air. The file Julia had produced was still resting on the desk, its corners slightly curled, as though it had been waiting for years to speak. No one moved. Ryan's lips parted, but no words came out. He stared at the document like it was a ghost from a past he didn't know he had. Keanu didn't look triumphant. He wasn't gloating. If anything, he seemed gentler, even smaller in his chair. He leaned slightly forward, voice low but steady, like he wasn't just talking to Ryan anymore. He was talking to every person who had ever felt unseen. I was one of those kids once, Keanu said softly. I know what it means to feel invisible, to be told your life is too expensive to save, to sit in a hospital room listening to grown-ups whisper numbers and watch your future hang in the balance. The audience didn't breathe. The camera feed, still rolling, captured his face. A man not offering excuses, but offering truth. My mother didn't have insurance. She was a housekeeper. Quiet, brave, and I had leukemia at 9. The doctor said I needed treatment immediately. We didn't know what to do. Then one day a man in a gray jacket walked into the hospital and handed the billing office a check. No press, no signature, just a quiet note. For Keanu, let him grow up. He paused, looking down for a moment. That's why I started the Reeves Assistance Fund. I didn't have a plan. I didn't even have a name for it. I just knew that what happened to me shouldn't be rare. It should be normal. Julia stood beside the camera operator, arms crossed tightly against her chest. She took one step forward, unable to hold it in any longer. And Ryan, she said, her voice trembling slightly, you were one of them too. Ryan turned his head slowly. His face was blank, almost numb. What are you talking about? She held up the sealed file again, this time pointing to the faded letter clipped to the front. Your medical records. From 1983. Emergency brain surgery after a car crash. Your parents couldn't afford the cost. You were 6 years old. But someone paid it. Ryan shook his head. No, I don't. My parents always said, to me they look like the two of them, sleeping in their twin bedroom. The donor asked to remain anonymous. But I checked, it was the Reeves Assistance Fund. Keanu's name isn't on it, but the foundation number matches. You were one of the first. The studio was silent. Keanu didn't speak. He just looked at Ryan with a calm, almost mournful gaze. No judgment, just recognition. A man seeing a boy he once was. Sitting across from him in disbelief. And then the live chat exploded. Full circle. Keanu saved me. Not a fraud. Hope still exists. Messages poured in. I'm crying. This is the most powerful thing I've ever seen on television. He saved him, and he didn't even know. This is what real heroes look like. Keanu doesn't raise his voice, he raises humanity. Ryan looked like he'd been hollowed out from the inside. The papers in front of him no longer made sense. They weren't proof, they weren't evidence. They were noise in a story that had always been bigger than him. And now, for the first time, he realized he wasn't the hunter. He'd been the saved. Ryan blinked rapidly as though the studio lights had grown too bright. He glanced down at the folder again, his fingers trembling over the yellowed paper. There it was, in unmistakable print. His own name, the date, the injury, and beside it, stamped in faded ink, paid in full by RF. I never knew, he said under his breath. You weren't supposed to, Keanu replied gently. The best things we do don't need to be seen. Julia stepped forward, this time not as an assistant, but as someone witnessing a truth too big to ignore. You thought this was about scandal, but it's always been about second chances. That little boy in that file, he got one. Because someone believed he was worth saving, and that someone was sitting across from you this entire time. Ryan turned to Keanu again. I came here to tear you down. I know. I thought I was exposing a fraud. I thought I was protecting people. Keanu nodded slowly. You were. In your way, you just didn't know who needed protecting yet. Ryan let the folder slide from his hands. It fluttered closed on the desk like a quiet apology. His shoulders dropped. His face softened. Not in shame, but in something deeper. Recognition. All around them, the energy shifted. The crew had stopped pretending to be invisible. One camera operator was wiping his eyes with a sleeve. A lighting tech pressed her hand to her mouth. In the control room, the switchboard operator whispered, "We're still alive," but no one moved to cut the feed, because no one wanted to. Julia stepped over to Ryan's side and gently turned his microphone toward him. People are listening, Ryan. Maybe it's time you spoke, honestly. He looked into the camera. For the first time that evening, he didn't see an audience. He saw himself, 30 years ago, lying in a hospital bed, tubes in his arms, his parents terrified. And he saw Keanu, not as a celebrity or a target, but as someone who had once been just as scared, just as powerless. I owe this man my life, Ryan said quietly, and I didn't even know it. The live chat exploded again. More hashtags, more hearts. Someone typed, "This is the most honest moment I've ever seen on TV." Another, "We need more stories like this. Less hate, more truth." Keanu smiled, but it wasn't pride. It was something older, wiser. "You don't owe me anything," he said softly. "You lived. That's enough." Ryan shook his head. "No, it's not. Because I almost destroyed something beautiful. I let someone put fear in my hands and told me it was truth. I was wrong. The camera didn't zoom. The music didn't swell. There were no flashing graphics, just two men on a quiet stage, one realizing he'd been saved, and the other reminding him it had never been about being known. In that moment, Ryan Maxwell wasn't a news anchor. He was a man whose entire identity had just shifted under his feet. And for the first time in his career, he had nothing scripted to say, only the truth. The moment the studio lights flickered and the network cut to commercial, a strange silence fell over the room. But it wasn't peace. It was tension thick enough to feel, humming behind the blinking monitors and whispered orders. Ryan Maxwell, once so polished and proud at the desk, sat frozen in his chair, eyes locked on Julia Lang. She was no longer the quiet assistant. She stood center stage, one hand trembling slightly as she held up the hard copy folder, the same one she'd quietly retrieved during the chaos of the last segment. Her voice had been calm, but it had sliced through the tension like a scalpel. "Ryan," she said moments before the cameras cut away, "you didn't ask who gave you those documents, did you?" Now, as the production crew scattered to regroup during the break, Ryan finally spoke. His voice was hoarse, barely audible. "What are you talking about?" Julia stepped forward. "I'm talking about Bradley Klein, the man who gave you that folder. He's not a whistleblower. He's a hedge fund manipulator, and he's betting millions on the Reeves Foundation failing." Ryan blinked, like he hadn't heard her right. "I have proof," Julia continued. "Emails, transaction logs, even the wire transfer from Klein's shell company, MediaCore Analytics, to your producer's private account. This wasn't journalism, it was sabotage." People stopped moving. Even the camera assistants and tech crew turned to listen. Julia slowly opened the folder, revealing color-coded tabs and timestamps. The papers were neatly arranged, but devastating. The room filled with a quiet dread. Ryan looked down at his desk. The documents he had waved triumphantly on air just minutes ago now felt radioactive. I didn't know. He said it came from inside Keanu's foundation." "Elle lied," Julia said flatly, "and you never fact-checked it. You wanted your big moment, so you ran with it." Someone in the control booth cursed under their breath. The director spoke into his headset, telling the floor they had 60 seconds until the show resumed. Julia didn't flinch. Bradley Klein shorted Keanu's live-stream gala event, set to launch next weekend. If donations tank, he makes a fortune. You were just his delivery system. Ryan's face turned a pale gray. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Julia closed the folder. "And just so you know, the foundation is filing a report with the SEC tonight. This isn't just a mistake. It's federal securities fraud." Then the floor manager shouted, "Back in 5, 4, 3. Everyone turned toward the cameras, but all eyes stayed on Ryan. The red light blinked back on. Ryan sat straighter, but his shoulders sagged beneath the weight of what had just been exposed. The smile he tried to muster for the camera twitched and disappeared. His voice cracked as he tried to recover. "We're back," he announced stiffly, the usual confidence gone. Before the break, some unexpected revelations were shared. Keanu didn't speak. He simply looked at Ryan, calm, quiet, steady, like a man who had already weathered far worse. Julia remained just behind the cameras, her eyes locked on Ryan, daring him to lie again. Ryan cleared his throat. "Earlier, I referenced documents given to me by a supposed insider source. That source has now been identified as Bradley Klein, a media investor. I was not aware of his financial interest in the failure of the Reeves Foundation." There were murmurs from the studio audience. The live stream chat flashed like lightning. Phrases like "set up," "corruption," and "sabotage" flooded the screen. But the most repeated hashtags were now "Keanu saved me" and "exposed on live TV." At first, Keanu was silent. Ryan shifted again, his hands shaking slightly as he reached for the very folder he had waved triumphantly just 30 minutes ago. He stared at it for a long moment before gently setting it aside. It no longer felt like a weapon. It felt like evidence against him. "I want to make something clear," Ryan said, voice lower now. "I came into this interview thinking I was uncovering a fraud. What I've learned is that I may have been used to create one." The camera panned to Keanu, who still hadn't moved from his seat. His expression was unchanged. Not triumphant, not angry, just deeply human. "I didn't come here tonight to defend myself," Keanu said, breaking the silence. "I came because I knew the foundation was being questioned, and I've seen what happens when doubt stops people from helping children." Julia stepped into the frame. The director hesitated but didn't stop her. She held up a printout of a wire confirmation. "This is a $1,200,000 0-cent trade placed by Bradley Klein's holding company 3 days ago, shorting the future broadcast revenue of the Reeves Foundation's upcoming charity livestream. If the public lost faith in the foundation tonight, that trade would earn him nearly $4 million in profit." Gasps echoed through the audience. Even the co-host in the wings looked stunned. "And Ryan," Julia continued, her voice tightening, "your producer received $45,000, 0 cents, through an untraceable debit card purchased by the same entity." Brian looked like he might be sick. He said it was for consulting. I didn't know." "You didn't ask," Julia replied. The cameras caught the moment in perfect silence. It wasn't just a failed ambush anymore. It was a public unraveling. The trust in media, the face of a network, and one man's reputation collapsing in real time. Keanu leaned forward gently, speaking into the stunned silence. "This isn't about me," he said. "It's about the families who might have stopped reaching out if tonight had gone differently. It's about kids who would have gone untreated because someone wanted to profit from silence and suspicion." Ryan's jaw clenched, but his eyes were no longer defensive. They were lost, hollow, as if he was only now beginning to grasp the damage, not to his reputation, but to those he had nearly hurt. The audience sat motionless. A moment later, Julia placed a photo on the table. It showed a young child in a hospital bed, a Reeves Foundation bracelet on her wrist, her hand holding a drawing of a rocket ship. The caption read, "Hope arrived yesterday." "We weren't selling inspiration," Julia said softly. "We were protecting it." The stage lights dimmed slightly. From the control room, the director whispered over the comms, "Cut to wide. Hold. Fade to black in 5. Ryan stared at the drawing. He didn't speak. He didn't have to, because the truth had already spoken louder than he ever could. The studio lights flickered back on, cutting through the tension like a scalpel. The red recording light glowed again. Everyone was back in their seats, but nothing felt the same. Ryan Maxwell adjusted his collar with trembling fingers, his jaw clenched, throat dry. No script could guide him now. No pre-written segment could prepare him for what had just unfolded. Keanu Reeves sat still beside him, composed, even after being ambushed live on national television. Ryan turned slowly toward him. His voice cracked before a word escaped. "I need to say something," Ryan whispered. The camera zoomed in as the entire studio audience leaned forward. Viewers at home could feel something was shifting, something real, raw. "I came into this interview ready to ruin your name," Ryan continued. "I was handed a folder and told you were a fraud. I believed it because I wanted to believe it. I thought taking you down would make my career." His eyes were red, voice thick with emotion. "But what I just saw, the names, the families, my own name in that file." He shook his head and covered his mouth briefly before continuing. "I tried to destroy the man who saved my life." The silence was absolute. Keanu turned his head, meeting Ryan's eyes not with anger, but compassion. Slowly, he reached over and placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder. "We've all forgotten who helped us," Keanu said quietly. "What matters is remembering now." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Then came applause, slow at first, but building. Not for spectacle, for honesty. Ryan looked out across the studio, visibly shaken. "I was 6. My parents were told I wouldn't make it after that car accident. I remember my mother crying in the hallway. I remember the bill they couldn't pay. I thought some government program stepped in. I never knew." He looked at Keanu again, his voice nearly gone. "You could have humiliated me. You could have walked out and let the truth slap me in the face in front of millions, but you didn't." Rex nodded. Keanu gave a soft nod. "You were a child. You weren't supposed to remember. But the people behind that donation remembered you." Ryan breathed deeply, struggling to collect himself. "I don't even deserve to be on this stage right now. But I want to use it, if I still can, to set the record straight." The audience went silent again, waiting to hear what he would say next. Ryan gathered the pages he had once used as weapons. The once crisp papers now looked crumpled and heavy in his hands. He held them up to the camera, not with conviction, but with shame. "These are the documents I was handed by Bradley Klein," he said, voice steadier now, though it carried the tremor of regret. "They looked real. The numbers seemed damning. I read them and thought I had found the story of my life." He paused, then dropped the papers flat onto the desk in front of him. But none of it was true. Julia stepped forward from the shadows of the set, a figure who had once been merely his assistant. Now she stood taller than ever. "We traced the sources, the bank accounts, the so-called missing millions. They weren't missing at all. They were transferred directly to hospitals, to surgical centers, to pediatric units across the country." She held up her phone, displaying a statement from the Mount Clair Children's Hospital. "This is confirmation of a $300,000 0-cents payment from the Reeves Foundation on behalf of a 4-year-old named Marcus Daniels. That surgery was the only thing standing between him and permanent paralysis. He walks today because of it." The studio screens behind them lit up with images of children smiling, recovering in hospital beds, hugging their parents. A stream of names appeared on the screen, dozens of them. Real lives, quietly impacted by what Ryan had tried to frame as a hoax. Ryan covered his face for a moment, then looked up again. "I said earlier I was trying to make my career. The truth is, I was trying to make myself matter. I thought exposing someone else would give me meaning, but tonight I found out I already mattered. Because someone believed I was worth saving, long before I ever picked up a microphone." A wave of emotion passed through the audience. Some were visibly crying, others sat silently, taking in the gravity of what had just unfolded. Keanu sat still, hands folded calmly, eyes filled not with triumph, but quiet understanding. "You didn't destroy me," he said. "You revealed something, deeper." Ryan nodded. "There are people out there watching this right now, people who think no one sees them, people who think their story doesn't matter. But you've been building something for decades, quietly, invisibly. And I see now, this wasn't about you. It was never about you. It's always been about the kids," Keanu said softly. At that moment, the studio phones started to ring. One by one, the production crew scrambled to answer them. On screen, the ticker began to flash. Donations to the Reeves Foundation are pouring in. Live chat feeds exploded with messages. "Keanu saved me. Full circle. Truth wins." Ryan looked into the camera again. "To anyone I misled tonight, I'm sorry, I was wrong. And I hope, no, I promise, to spend the rest of my time as a journalist making it right." He turned to Keanu once more. "And to you, sir, thank you. For saving me, for giving my family a second chance, and for not turning your back on me when I tried to bring you down." The room erupted in applause, louder and longer than anything yet. As the applause slowly faded, Keanu leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper, but it carried with unexpected strength. "We all forget where we came from sometimes," he said. "That doesn't make us broken. It makes us human." He looked across the room, not at the cameras, but at the crew, the audience, the people off stage holding their breath. This foundation was never meant to make headlines. It was meant to save lives. Quietly, respectfully, no names on buildings, no press conferences, Just children getting another chance to dream. Ryan's eyes filled again, but he held it together. "Do you think I can still help?" he asked. Keanu gave a slow nod. "Help isn't something you earn. It's something you pass on." The words hung in the air like a balm. Julia walked back into frame and set down a new folder beside the others. "Here's a list of 30 more children waiting on critical treatments. Most don't know who's paying the bill. They only know help came when it was needed most." Ryan glanced at the names, his hand trembling slightly as he touched the edge of the paper. "I want to tell their stories," he said. "Then start," Keanu replied gently. "Let's give the truth the spotlight it deserves." The red light on the studio camera blinked once, then stayed solid. They were live, and for the first time that night, everything felt real. The studio had gone quiet again, the echo of Ryan's apology still hanging in the air. Keanu sat still for a long moment, then leaned forward. His voice was calm, low, and without drama, but the weight of it landed like a stone on every heart in the room. "There's something I've never talked about publicly," he said. "Not on talk shows, not in interviews, not in magazines, because it was never meant for public ears. But maybe tonight, it matters." Ryan sat still beside him, eyes red, lips pressed tight. The audience leaned in. Somewhere in the back, Julia set down her headset and watched without blinking. Keanu took a slow breath. "When I was in my early 20s, my sister Kim got sick. She was just a teenager. And it wasn't something small. It was leukemia." The words hit like a whisper and a blow at the same time. A few people in the crowd gasped quietly. Others held their breath. "She was a fighter," Keanu said. "Always had been. But we were broke. There wasn't insurance. There weren't options. And the first hospital we went to told us outright that experimental treatments weren't available to non-covered patients. That's what they called her, a non-covered patient." He looked out at the crowd, not accusing anyone, just remembering. "I sat in that hospital waiting room and watched a girl who lit up my world fight for her life with a number written next to it. And the number was bigger than anything we had." A pause. "Died." That was the moment. The moment something broke inside me, and something else woke up. Ryan swallowed hard. "So I started putting away everything I made. From my first big acting check, I took half of it and gave it to the doctor who agreed to treat her. I didn't ask for receipts, I didn't ask for headlines, I just paid it." A murmur moved through the audience. "And when she went into remission, I made a promise. If she made it out, I'd make sure other kids did too." Keanu glanced at Julia, then back to the crowd. That promise became what today is called the Reeves Foundation. But back then, it wasn't a foundation. It was a stack of uncashed checks in a drawer. I'd get letters, quiet ones, from hospitals, from nurses, from parents who'd heard through word of mouth. And if I could help, I did. He pulled out a folded paper from his inner jacket pocket. Not for the camera, not for effect, just something that had been in there all night. "This is a list," he said. "First 12 children the foundation ever helped. Before we were even a legal organization, before there was a website. 12 names, 12 surgeries, 12 kids who got a tomorrow." He unfolded it and laid it gently on the table. A few rows of names, a few handwritten notes beside each. Julia saw it from her seat and covered her mouth. "I kept it," Keanu said, "because every time I got overwhelmed, every time I thought it wasn't enough, I looked at this, and I reminded myself that one day, one child, is always enough to start with." Ryan looked down at the list, not speaking. "But that's not the end of the story," Keanu continued, "because what started with 12 didn't stay 12. Keanu placed the folded list aside and let his fingers rest on the table for a second, as if grounding himself. Then he looked back up, steady but soft. "Over the past 27 years, he continued, the Reeves Foundation has funded 628 surgeries, not including follow-ups, not including transportation, housing, or counseling support for families. The studio went completely still. Even the sound crew stopped moving. A wave of shock passed through the audience. Most of those donations were anonymous, Keanu said. No credit, no plaques, just hospital bills, paid directly. No child ever saw the money. No parent ever had to prove they were worthy of help. They were just helped. Julia's voice cracked from the side of the stage. You never told anyone. Keanu looked toward her and gave a small nod. Because it wasn't for anyone. It was for them. It was for my sister, for that feeling of sitting in a hospital and being told the price of love. Ryan blinked, still visibly shaken. But the foundation has no official staff, no big media presence. There's no gala footage, no press releases. That's intentional, Keanu replied. We run lean. We work with doctors, nurses, and social workers who vet cases privately. Every dollar goes through a network that's built on trust, not paperwork. And the reason there's no media coverage, he paused again, just long enough for the words to sink in, is because a child's surgery shouldn't be a photo opportunity. That line hit the room like a thunderclap. Some in the audience began to cry silently. Others nodded with a newfound reverence. Julia turned away briefly to wipe her eyes. Ryan tried to speak, but his voice cracked. Why didn't you ever say something? All these years, people thought you were just this quiet actor who liked motorcycles. Keanu gave a faint smile. Because that's what I am. A quiet actor who likes motorcycles. And also, someone who once sat in a hospital hallway and promised to make the world hurt a little less. He leaned forward, locking eyes with Ryan. But I never thought the promise would reach you too. Ryan's face flushed with emotion. He was breathing hard now, like someone finally waking up from a long, blind dream. You were one of the kids, Keanu said gently. From a shelter in Tacoma. You had no insurance. A rare condition. A ruptured intestine. You were 6 years old. Ryan blinked fast, his whole body frozen. And someone made a call. That someone was my sister. The name hit like a bell. Ryan's hands began to tremble. She asked me to help. She never told me your name. I never needed to know. Until tonight, Keanu sat back, exhaling slowly. That was one of the first surgeries the foundation ever paid for. And tonight, you almost helped destroy it. But I understand why. He looked out at the crowd, not judging. We live in a world where good things are hard to believe. Where kindness looks like a scam. And when you're trained to be skeptical, even miracles look like lies. Then he leaned in one last time, voice low and steady. But the truth is still the truth, even when no one's looking. A moment of silence passed. Then the crowd began to rise. First one person, then another. An unprompted standing ovation filled the studio, not for fame or performance, but for the truth finally spoken aloud. As the live broadcast resumed, the studio dimmed slightly. Ryan Maxwell sat silently, his hands folded, his eyes still damp. Keanu Reeves remained composed, quiet, but something had shifted. The earlier tension had unraveled. Now, something deeper was rising. Then the screen behind them flickered on. We'd like to share something now, Julia Lang's voice said softly through the studio speakers. The first video began. It was shaky, filmed on a phone, but the moment it played, the room stilled. Boy, maybe 10, stood on two metal legs. His arms were outstretched, and he grinned so wide it filled the entire screen. My name is Caleb. I was born without bones in my legs. Doctors said I might never walk. But someone I never met believed in me anyway. They paid for my surgeries, my rehab, my prosthetics. I can run now. I can race my brother. Thank you, whoever you are. A hush fell over the room. Keanu didn't speak. He didn't need to. The next clip showed a young girl, her head bald but her eyes bright. She stood in front of a wall covered in drawings. "I'm Lila. I had leukemia. My parents said the insurance said no, but someone said yes. That someone made sure I got the medicine that saved me. I don't know their name, but they gave me a second birthday." Tears welled up in the front row of the audience. A man clutched his wife's hand, both unable to look away from the screen. Clip after clip played. A teenage boy in a hospital gown, grinning, with a guitar in his lap. "They sent music tutors to my room while I recovered. You don't know what that means until you've sat in silence for weeks." A girl with burn scars down her arms, now volunteering in a children's hospital. "I know what it's like to be the kid behind the curtain. I'm here now, giving back, because someone once gave to me." And then came the video that broke whatever strength Ryan had left. A young woman in her early 20s sat at a desk. Her hair was pulled back, and she wore a stethoscope around her neck. "I'm Elena. When I was 16, I collapsed during gym class, a rare heart condition. I needed surgery in 72 hours or I'd be gone. No money, no chance. Then, out of nowhere, the bill disappeared. Paid. I became a doctor because I wanted to be for someone what a stranger once was for me." More clips awaited. As the next clip began, the audience leaned forward in silence. A boy with thick glasses and a quiet smile sat in a classroom filled with books. A soft piano melody played in the background as he spoke. "My name is Raphael. I used to live in shelters after my parents passed. I had seizures. No one knew what was wrong. The tests were expensive, and I didn't matter to the system. But then someone stepped in. The foundation paid for a full neurological workup. I was diagnosed, treated, stable. I'm 13 now, and I'm going to be a writer." The screen faded to black for a moment, then it lit up again with the image of a laughing child in a wheelchair racing down a ramp built into a modest home. "I'm Toby. My mom cried when they installed the wheelchair lift. I thought it was because she was sad. She told me later it was because she didn't ask anyone for help. But the help came anyway." The studio audience wiped their eyes. Even the production crew, usually unseen and unmoved, had lowered their cameras to glance up, visibly shaken. Another girl appeared on screen. Her skin was pale but glowing with joy. She sat under a cherry blossom tree. "I'm Hannah. I was born with a rare disorder that makes my bones fragile. I've had 18 fractures. I missed school, missed birthdays, missed dances. But this year, I walked across the stage at graduation with braces on my legs and a scholarship in my hand. They paid for my tutor, my treatment, my hope." Julia glanced at Keanu, who sat unmoving, watching each child speak as if their voices stitched something back together in him. One more video began to play. A tall teenage boy with a prosthetic hand was swimming laps in a pool. Between strokes, he surfaced to speak. "I'm Malik. I lost my hand in an accident when I was 10. People stared. I hid. Then the Reeves Foundation paid for the best prosthetic money could buy. Now I compete. I've got medals. I've got confidence. I'm not broken. I'm just different. And someone out there reminded me of that." Keanu closed his eyes briefly. Ryan turned away from the screen, trying to compose himself. His throat tightened as he realized that every moment of doubt he'd thrown on air had just been answered, wordlessly, powerfully, by the very people whose stories he never bothered to learn. The testimonials weren't dramatic. They were soft, honest, real, and that made them hit harder than anything he'd said that night. The final video began. A girl no older than 9 stood in front of a whiteboard covered in equations. Her curly hair was tied in twin puffs, and her smile lit up the room. "My name is Amira. I had leukemia. It was really bad. I lost my hair, my strength, my friends. But the Reeves Foundation paid for a treatment that wasn't covered. I'm okay now. My doctor says I'm in remission. I want to be a scientist one day so I can help kids like me." She looked straight into the camera. "And Mr. Reeves, if you're watching this, thank you for saving my life." The video ended. The studio was silent. A single clap echoed from the back. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire audience rose to their feet in a thunderous standing ovation. Some wiped away tears. Others simply stood in quiet reverence. Keanu didn't move to speak. He didn't need to. The children had said everything. Above the stage, the live stream comment feed exploded. Keanu saved me, the quiet hero. This is real charity. Hope has a face. And trending at the very top, let the children speak. The segment had barely ended when social media began to quake under the weight of a single moment. Keanu's quiet grace, Ryan's raw apology, and the undeniable truth that had just unfolded in front of millions. Within minutes, hashtags like Keanu saved me, believe in good, and Reeves Foundation surged to the top of trending charts worldwide. The live broadcast had been clipped and uploaded by viewers before the network even returned from its next commercial break. On Twitter, a mother from Nebraska shared a photo of her son's hospital wristband, writing, "That foundation saved my baby's life 2 years ago. I never knew it was Keanu behind it. God bless you." On Instagram, celebrities began speaking out, many of them with stories of how they'd seen Keanu behind the scenes at children's hospitals, refusing press, simply sitting with scared families. One actor posted, "He showed up for my niece during her chemo rounds and brought her a stuffed dog. He never told us who he was donating through, just said he wanted her to get better." Donations to the Reeves Foundation website, which had quietly operated in the background of the internet for years, suddenly exploded. Within an hour, the server crashed under the flood of people trying to give. Volunteers scrambled to redirect traffic to backup sites and third-party processors. A new wave of medical requests poured in from across the country. Meanwhile, inside the control room of the studio, the producer who had handed Ryan the damning file, the one that sparked this ambush, was nowhere to be found. Julia Lang tried to reach him on his phone, but his voicemail picked up on the first ring. Security footage later confirmed he had slipped out a back exit during the last commercial break. The network board was already in emergency session. Lawyers reviewed the broadcast frame by frame. What began as a bold exposé now looked like a premeditated smear, a personal vendetta disguised as journalism. Emails surfaced, leaked from within, showing that Bradley Klein, the shady media investor Julia had named, had not only pushed the segment, but also pressured staff not to verify the documents. That night, the network issued a public statement on its official social channels. It read, "We deeply regret the events of this evening's broadcast and recognize that the segment presented did not meet our editorial standards. We offer a formal apology to Mr. Keanu Reeves and the Reeves Foundation for the distress and confusion caused. An internal investigation is underway." But Keanu said nothing. He gave no interviews. He didn't issue a statement. When reporters camped outside his home the next morning, he simply shook his head and said, "Let's get back to the work." That response, modest, grounded, unflinching, only fueled the public's support. Outside the foundation's modest headquarters in Pasadena, flowers began to appear. Cards taped to the front door bore handwritten notes. "Thank you for saving my daughter. You gave us hope. We'll never forget what you did." Inside, the team worked around the clock. Not on PR, not on damage control, but on grant approvals, surgical funding, and the same quiet miracles they had delivered for nearly 2 decades. What the world had just witnessed wasn't the fall of a man. It was the rise of a mission, finally seen in full light. By the next afternoon, national headlines had changed tone entirely. Major outlets that had once teased the Keanu Reeves ghost charity pivoted sharply. Now they were running titles like "The Most Humble Philanthropist in Hollywood" and "How One Actor Quietly Funded 600 Surgeries." Editorials were published by the hour, urging networks and reporters to revisit the ethics of chasing scandal over truth. News anchors across the country referenced the live broadcast with visible emotion. One wept during her segment, confessing that her own cousin had received treatment funded by the Reeves Foundation and she'd never known the source. Another simply said, "If this is what invisible charity looks like, then we need more ghosts like Keanu Reeves." Ryan Maxwell didn't return to the news desk. The network placed him on extended leave, though Ryan himself refused interviews. The only public statement he issued was handwritten, photographed, and posted online. It read, "I let ambition blind me. I forgot the power of quiet good. Mr. Reeves saved my life once, then gave me the grace to fix the moment I nearly ruined his. I will spend the rest of my career earning back that trust." People didn't cancel him. In fact, many respected him more for coming clean. Forgiveness followed honesty, and while his reputation had taken a hit, his humanity had risen. Ryan became, in many ways, the secondary lesson of the night, a reminder that accountability too can inspire. Meanwhile, Julia Lang's name began circulating online as the unsung hero of the night. Within 24 hours, she had received over 10,000 messages of support, dozens of job offers from investigative outlets, and a handwritten letter from a family whose son was on the list for a Reeves Fund clinical trial. They thanked her for being the voice that turned the story, but Keanu stayed quiet. His only public act in the wake of the chaos came 3 days later. Without any press notification, without a single tweet, he visited a children's hospice in Oregon, one that the foundation had supported quietly for years. A nurse later posted an anonymous comment under a Reddit thread. "I came at night, brought a stack of storybooks, sat with 3 of our kids and read to them like it was the only thing in the world that mattered. No cameras, just love." That comment alone received over 100,000 upvotes. As donations continued flooding in, the Reeves Foundation established a separate emergency relief fund to meet the sudden increase in demand. Hospitals from across the country reached out with cases. Families on the brink of losing everything because their insurers refused experimental or urgent procedures. And now there were funds. Not just from Keanu, but from thousands of people inspired to give. A 16-year-old girl with leukemia posted a TikTok, tearfully thanking the Reeves Foundation for covering her bone marrow transplant. The video hit 10 million views. Beneath it, a comment read, "You're not invisible anymore." More than 4,000 people replied with hearts. And still, Keanu said the same words every time a mic was thrust toward him. "I'm not the story, the kids are. Let's get back to the work." That line, repeated with sincerity, became the rallying cry of something bigger than a single foundation. It became a movement, one built not on fame, but on humility, not on exposure, but quiet purpose. And in the silence left behind, the world found something rare. It found proof that the good guys are real. Ryan Maxwell hadn't slept. The applause, the confessions, the tidal wave of public reaction, none of it gave him peace. He had tried to ruin a man who once saved his life, and the weight of that realization sat on his chest like a stone. The studio lights were off now, the headlines were out, and the world had made up its mind. But in the quiet morning after, there was only one voice Ryan could still hear. Keanu's, "Let's get back to the work." Those 6 words haunted Ryan more than any public backlash ever could. They weren't angry. They weren't bitter. They were honest, focused, bigger than Ryan's guilt. By mid-afternoon, Ryan found himself standing outside a modest building on Sunset Boulevard, just where Keanu had asked him to meet. A private address, no media, no fanfare. A brown envelope sat in Keanu's hands, sealed with a simple red sticker. He handed it over without a word. Ryan opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a single letter. Her name is Bella. She's 4. She needs an enzyme infusion therapy for a rare genetic disorder. Her parents have been denied coverage twice. The foundation was going to fund her anonymously, but I thought maybe Keanu's signature wasn't at the bottom. Just a quiet postscript. "Some debts we pay with money, others with action. You choose." Ryan stared at the name. Bella Sanchez, 4 years old. Diagnosis: MPSI, a degenerative disease that slowly attacks every organ, every cell in a child's body. Untreated, it was fatal by age 10. The treatment existed, but it cost over $200,000 per year. He looked up at Keanu. "I don't have that kind of money." Keanu nodded. Neither did her parents. There was no judgment in his voice, only a quiet question that hung in the air. "Will you do what's right now?" Ryan went home, opened every account he had, and wired the first $20,000 himself. Then he picked up the phone and made a call. Not to a bank, not to a lawyer, but to the same audience he had once misled. He started a fundraiser, not for redemption, for Bella. The video Ryan posted was just 90 seconds long. No lights, no studio, no fancy graphics. Just him, standing outside the hospital where he had once been saved, holding Bella's photo in his hand. He didn't read a script, he didn't speak like an anchor. He spoke like a man trying to make something right. "This is Bella. She's 4. She needs treatment that could save her life, the same way someone once saved mine. I've already given what I can. Now, I'm asking for your help." Within minutes, donations began rolling in. Small amounts at first, $5, $10. Then a surge, $50, $100, even $1,000. One comment read simply, "This is for my daughter, who didn't make it. I hope Bella does." In under 6 hours, the goal was met. In 10, it was doubled. By morning, Ryan had spoken to Bella's mother, Carmen Sanchez, on the phone. Her voice shook as she cried into the receiver. "We were out of options. We didn't even know what to tell her anymore. We just kept saying, 'Soon, baby, soon.' And now," she couldn't finish. That afternoon, Ryan flew out to meet them in person. Carmen stood at the airport gate, holding Bella in her arms. The little girl's cheeks were round and soft, her eyes bright, though rimmed with exhaustion. She had no idea what her future had almost become. "Mr. Maxwell," Carmen whispered, her voice already breaking, "why would you help us?" Ryan knelt beside Bella. He didn't answer right away. He looked at her, really looked at her, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small photo. One of himself, at her age, a hospital gown, bandages, a scared smile. "Because someone helped me when I didn't even know I needed it, and now it's my turn." Bella tilted her head. "You were sick too?" "I was, a long time ago." She thought for a moment, then reached forward with both arms and hugged his neck. "Thank you." It was the first time in years Ryan felt completely, unmistakably human. Ryan stayed in town longer than planned. He walked with Bella through the pediatric wing of the hospital the next morning, hand in hand. She insisted on showing him the fish mural near the elevators and the playroom where she colored between treatments. For every bright laugh, there was a flicker of pain in her mother's eyes, visible only to those who knew what it meant to wait for a miracle too long. Later, when Carmen thanked him again for what he had done, Ryan shook his head. "No, don't thank me. Thank the people who believed in her." "You started it," she replied, eyes brimming. "And sometimes, that's all it takes." Ryan posted a follow-up video that night from his hotel room. He spoke with a calm he hadn't felt in years. "I didn't save Bella, you did. Every single one of you who donated, commented, or shared her story, this is your victory. This is what happens when we stop trying to expose people and start trying to lift people." He paused, then added quietly, "I used to think being a reporter was about breaking a story, but now I think maybe it's about building one." Bella Strong began trending the next day. News outlets picked up the story, not as a scandal, but as a redemptive moment, one of the rare times the media ate its own shame and turned it into light. The Reeves Foundation made no comment, but a quiet update appeared on its rarely used page. Honor match secured. Bella's treatment begins Thursday. Thank you to all who made it possible. Keanu never called Ryan. He didn't need to. Instead, Ryan received a package at his apartment a week later. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. Black and white. A hospital room from decades ago. A boy with bandages around his ribs and a note clipped to the bottom. Maxwell, room 6, paid in full. RF. Beneath it, scribbled in blue ink, sometimes we plant trees under whose shade we may never sit. Thank you for planting one of your own. Ryan didn't cry. He sat down, quietly, and smiled for the first time in a very long time. He had almost destroyed a man's legacy. Instead, he had added to it. 6 months had passed since the broadcast that changed everything. Ryan Maxwell, once a rising news anchor, now walked through the doors of the Reeves Foundation with a purpose far greater than ratings. He had traded the spotlight for a desk in a quiet corner, where truth and accountability mattered more than views. The transformation wasn't overnight. It came slowly, piece by piece, like a cracked mirror slowly replaced with something clearer. On his first day at the foundation, he wore the same suit he had once used for primetime interviews. But this time, there were no cameras, no teleprompters, only a quiet office and a mission that felt real. Keanu greeted him with a nod, not ceremony. "We don't do titles here," he said. "Just work, that matters." Ryan's role was simple on paper but profound in impact. Transparency officer. His job was to ensure every donation, every payment, and every story the Reeves Foundation touched was backed with verifiable proof, not to silence critics, but to honor every life they helped. Julia Lang had already been hard at work developing something new. Together, they had conceptualized the Light Chain Initiative, an ambitious, decentralized model that allowed donors to contribute anonymously to verified cases without the foundation serving as a middleman. Hospitals would confirm needs. The system would match resources, track progress, and report outcomes, all without revealing patient identities unless consented. By month 2, they had quietly funded 173 treatments through the new system. Children with rare disorders in rural areas, teens undergoing experimental therapies, even an elderly man in Detroit who needed a life-saving lung procedure. Ryan sat in on every case review, not as a gatekeeper but as a witness. He often wept reading letters from parents, grandparents, and sometimes children themselves. They didn't care about politics or headlines. They just wanted one more day with the person they loved. What struck him most was the silence, the quiet power of kindness with no desire for attention. The stark contrast between his past life and this one. He used to chase exposure. Now he protected those who wanted none. One afternoon, Julia entered his office carrying a folder. "This one's going to be tough," she said. 17-year-old girl, rare immune disorder, treatment available, but it's overseas. We've got a window of 3 weeks. Ryan nodded, already reaching for the Light Chain interface. "We'll make it happen." They launched a soft campaign. No names, just a photo of an empty bed and a pair of ballet slippers. Within hours, the funds arrived from 4,239 anonymous donors across 27 countries. A week later, the girl was on a plane to Geneva for treatment. That evening, Ryan recorded a voiceover for a new campaign promo. His voice, once used to command attention, now carried something different: humility. "You've seen what truth can do," he said into the mic. "Now imagine what happens when thousands of truths connect across borders, across lives, across hearts. This is the Light Chain. And this time, the story isn't about me. It's about us." The screen faded to black. Then came the new campaign's tagline, 4 simple words that echoed everything he had learned. Truth saves lives too. The response to the campaign was overwhelming. Within days, the Light Chain Initiative servers began receiving support from around the globe. Not just in the form of donations, but offers. Offers from doctors who wanted to volunteer time, engineers who wanted to improve the platform, ordinary people who simply asked, "How can I help?" Keanu had remained behind the scenes during the entire rollout. When the Foundation's board asked for a press conference, he politely declined. "Let the work speak," he said. It did. Loudly. The Foundation's metrics showed a shift not just in how money was given, but why. The anonymity of the light chain attracted givers who had grown tired of red tape and skepticism. Every transaction was tracked to the hospital, every outcome documented in private, encrypted reports. Donors weren't thanked publicly. They didn't want to be. Their reward was knowing they had helped someone breathe easier, walk again, live. Ryan sat with Julia in the office one night as the final numbers from the campaign loaded on screen. She looked tired, but proud. 56 surgeries approved, 83 treatments. 4 cancer remissions already confirmed, she read off the screen. Ryan exhaled. All from a promo that never showed a single face. Julia nodded. The idea worked, Ryan. No more centers of power. Just a network of compassion. The light chain map blinked on the screen, dots lighting up in real time. Southeast Asia, the Midwest, Eastern Europe, Africa. It looked like stars appearing in the night sky, each one a promise kept. Ryan leaned back in his chair, remembering the first night he met Keanu, remembering the heat of the studio lights, the questions he had rehearsed, the lies he believed. "Do you think people will ever trust media again?" he asked. Julia turned to him. "Not all media, but maybe? The storytellers who admit when they've been wrong." He looked down. "That used to be me. The man who almost ruined all this." She shook her head. "No, that was the man who hadn't remembered yet." Later that week, Keanu walked into the office with a worn envelope. He placed it gently on Ryan's desk. "Thought you should see this," he said. Inside was a letter from a 14-year-old boy named Mateo, whose brain tumor had been removed 3 months ago through a light chain-funded hospital in Argentina. He didn't know who had paid. He didn't know who had organized it. He just wanted to say thank you. He wrote about his dreams, about becoming a doctor so he could help the next me. And at the end, one sentence stood out. "You don't have to be famous to save a life." Ryan stared at it for a long time. He turned to Keanu. "Would you mind if we close the next campaign with this line?" Keanu smiled. "That's what it's all about." By the end of the 6th month, Ryan and Julia were traveling to different countries to train local partners in building their own light chain nodes, mini networks tailored to their own regions. They didn't require Reeves Foundation branding. They didn't ask for credit. They just needed connection, clarity, and quiet resolve. During one seminar in Nairobi, Ryan told a room of 20 social workers, "This isn't about changing the whole world. It's about making sure one child doesn't get lost in it." The room went silent. Then, applause. The truth had become contagious. By year's end, 11 light chain networks were active, spanning 41 countries. And the man who once sought headlines was now shaping a legacy without needing to be seen. Because now, Ryan finally understood. Not all heroes have names. Some just build the chain and let the light travel through it. The morning air outside St. Elizabeth's Children's Hospital was quiet, still, and cool. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a warm amber hue across the concrete paths that curved around the garden benches. A few nurses walked past in scrubs, exchanging soft greetings, but most of the hospital remained hushed. It was early. Too early for visitors. But Keanu Reeves was already there. He stood alone by the outer wall of the children's wing, dressed in his usual black jacket, hands in his pockets. His eyes scanned the courtyard until they landed on a wooden bench under the shade of a jacaranda tree. It was the same bench where he had once sat waiting for news about a little girl named Eva Santana. And now, It was the bench where her memory quietly lived on. In his hands, Keanu held a single sheet of paper. It was slightly crumpled, with corners that had been folded and unfolded many times. He approached the bench slowly, the sound of his shoes muffled by the grass and gravel beneath him. The drawing was simple, done in crayon. It showed a small girl with a wide smile flying through the sky in a red superhero cape. Her hand reached up and held tightly to the hand of a tall man beside her. The man didn't wear a cape. He wore no costume at all. He was just standing there, letting her fly, anchoring her flight like gravity without stealing her light. Above them, written in a child's handwriting, were 4 words: "Thank you for lifting." Keanu knelt and placed the drawing on the bench. He smoothed it with his hand, then sat beside it, eyes fixed on the paper as if it still held her presence. He didn't speak. Not at first. But a voiceover soon filled the silence, steady and gentle, as if carried on the wind. "I was one of them," the voice said. "One of the forgotten kids, and for a while I believed what most of us believe, that pain just belongs to you and no one else." The image cut to flashes of Ava in the hospital hallway, twirling with her IV pole like it was a dance partner, her laughter echoing behind nurses who couldn't help but smile. But someone reached into that silence and changed everything for me. And that's all I ever wanted to do in return. The screen showed a brief montage of children smiling with their families, all linked by quiet donations and anonymous kindness. Their faces flashed by. Leo, whose lungs had healed, Camille, who now played violin again, and Eva, who had once said she'd become a superhero just so no other kid had to feel like she did. The voice returned. "Pomact. That's all it takes to begin a ripple." Keanu looked up from the bench then. His eyes weren't filled with tears. They were calm, deep, reflective. The kind of look that comes only after walking through fire and choosing to stay soft. A nurse passing nearby gave him a nod of recognition and respect. He nodded back. The camera pulled away, slowly, rising until the bench was just a part of the landscape. A small, simple piece of a much larger story. But the drawing remained visible, flapping gently in the breeze. As the camera lingered on the bench, the voice continued, quieter now, almost like a memory being shared between old friends. "You don't need to wear a cape to save someone. You just need to care. You just need to show up." Across the screen, real-time messages began to appear, thousands of them flooding in from people watching the interview's aftermath. One read, "I found out last year my brother's cancer treatment was funded anonymously. I never knew until now." Another, "I was one of the kids. I was saved by the Reeves Foundation in 2004. I'm a nurse today. Thank you, Keanu." Hashtags lit up across every major platform. Keanu saved me, Full Circle, Invisible Hands, Truth Matters. Ryan Maxwell's final narration echoed over the footage. His voice was steady, changed. Not the same polished tone that had opened the live show, but one grounded in gratitude. Sometimes we look for meaning in headlines, in numbers, in things we can measure, but the most powerful things, you can't measure them at all. A quiet visit, a single hand held, a letter that never made the news. These are the moments that save us, not just from death, but from despair, from silence. The screen faded to black. Then one last image appeared. Eva's drawing, placed in a glass frame now hanging inside the hospital entrance. Visitors passed by it every day. Most didn't know her name, but those who did never forgot her courage. And below the drawing, engraved in simple brass letters, were words she once whispered to her nurse just days before her final operation. "If someone helped me, I want them to know I felt it." The voiceover returned one final time. This time, it was Keanu's voice. If you believe one act of kindness can echo for decades, hit like and share this incredible story. Have you ever been saved without knowing who helped you? Tell us in the comments. And if you could say one thing to someone who once changed your life, what would it be? The video ended in silence, but the story continued. In every viewer who paused, in every tear wiped away, in every child waiting for a miracle, who now just might receive it.